Please welcome Matt Lizzimore, Drive Editor for Lifestyle, and Steve Huntingford, Editor of What Car?
Hello there. As it says up there, I am indeed Steve Huntingford, editor of What Car, and I have been testing cars for more than 20 years now. To give you an example of that. Ooh. Sorry, apologies. Hey, ooh. Let's go back a bit. There we go. As I was saying, I've been testing cars for more than 20 years now. This little beauty here, the Daihatsu YRV Turbo, was the first car I ever reviewed professionally back in 2003. As for What Car has been testing cars since 1973. Safe to say that the equipment that we use has improved somewhat over the years, and hopefully you'll agree, so have the trousers.
I'm Matt. I've been writing about cars for 12 years now, and currently I write for Mobility Lifestyle magazine, reviewing cars and looking at features of accessibility.
Despite all those years of experience, though, one thing I think we have not seen as much change in the car industry and the way cars are evolving as they are right now, and indeed as they are going to over the next few years. We're going to put three things in particular today that are changing the cars and will change the cars that you drive. And starting with electrification. Now, every car on sale today, or almost every car, it's going well.
Almost every car you've got on sale today is electrified in one way or another. Either that car has mild hybrid technology, which means that it has a small amount of electrical assistance, which takes some of the strain off the engine to improve efficiency. It's a full hybrid, which means it can run solely on electric power over short distances, best in stop-start traffic. There's plug-in hybrids, the latest versions of which have a real-world range of about 50 miles, the best of them, which means much of the time you can treat them like electric cars if you bother to plug them in, which is unfortunately lots of people don't. And then there are fully electric cars. And that's what we're going to focus on more today, because let's be honest, that's where we're going. Come to 2035, that's all you'll be able to buy if you want a new car, unless they change the rules again. Now, fully electric cars, back in 2016, they represented less than 1% of the new car market. And if you told me back then that they'd boost the way they have, I wouldn't have believed you, because frankly, right back then, they were terrible. But there are some actually great electric cars on sale today, to the extent that we ended up with last year a record high of 16.5% of the market being fully electric. However, things are not quite all as rosy and heading up as that graph would suggest. The reason being is that a lot of that is company and fleet sales. The private electric car market is actually shrinking. The reason why it works so well for company cars is there are big financial incentives to do that, not so much if you're a private buyer. Now that's if you look at the registration. So this is so far this year. On the left, you will see that is the most popular cars so far this year, and there's not a single electric car among them. On the right is the top 10 most popular reviews on What Car. And What Car gives you a good indication. About a third of Britain's car buyers use What Car before purchasing their next vehicle. So that shows you the sort of vehicles people are researching, people are thinking of buying. And, well, as you said, there's just one electric car there. In 10th place, the Volvo EX30. Is that strange? Well, yes, that does show how the interest has declined. If we go back to June 2022, that was the peak of electric car interest that we saw. 5 of the top 10, including the number 1, were electric cars. So what has changed then to decline that market? Well, the first thing is the government removed the incentives for the grants towards going electric. Secondly, there was obviously a big rise in energy prices. So where previously electric cars were a bit of a no-brainer because they were much cheaper to run than filling up with petrol, suddenly that was no longer the case. And thirdly, there's been a lot of negative coverage in the mainstream media about this. I think potentially we've all seen these stories about talking about car parks collapsing, roads being torn up, all that sort of thing, and cars catching fire. A lot of this, let's be honest, but the vast majority of this is not true. No electric car is going to collapse a car park. If you look at the fire figures, they're no more likely to catch fire than any other type of car. In fact, diesels are the most likely type of car to catch fire, if you're worried about that. And anyway, the vast majority of car fires are through arson, not through the car spontaneously combustion. But there are, and I actually spoke to a colleague of mine about this, or a former colleague of mine who now works for the motoring desk at the Sun, and said, look, what is going on here? What is with all these negative stories? Is it an agenda? Are you being paid to write these stories? And he said, no, it's nothing like that, really. It's just simply that people quite like reading negative electric car stories, so we get asked to write more of them. So that's what it comes down to, really. Having said all that, I'm saying most things of these stories you read are not true. However, there are some, let's be honest about this, there are some electric car negatives that are true. And the big one around those is charging. So the UK charging network is patchy, is probably the best way to describe it. It's in some areas of the country, particularly around big cities, it's good. In other areas, it's less good. And here's an example. Here's What Car's header video, Doug Revolta, trying to charge an electric car. And this was not set up for this purpose. It was a road trip video that we were doing. But this is the problems he had while trying to charge.
Time to charge. So, connect plug, it says. Plug is connected. Finished. Please return. I haven't even started. Okay, so I've got to put it back. Have a great day. Drive safely. Thanks. Welcome. Connect plug. Plug connected. Success. Please wait. Communicating with vehicle. Very interesting. Please pay. Right. Processing. Payment accepted. Finished. Please return plug. That's good. Have a great day. Drive safe. I'd love to. Right. Welcome. Connect plug. Plug connected. Communicating with vehicle. Please wait. Communication failed. Return the plug and try again. Third time lucky. Plug connected. Success. Communicating with vehicle. Please wait. Right. Please pay. I got this far before. Processing. Card accepted. Payment accepted. I'm excited now. Starting session. I don't think I got this far last time. It's charging. As easy as that.
Unfortunately, the problems with public charging also extend to accessibility issues. So a little while ago, I took a road trip with a Motability customer who was in a wheelchair, and we basically went on a very long drive just to see what the charging experience was like at a number of public charging stations. And we found numerous issues. There were problems with curbs. There were curbs around the chargers, which meant that you couldn't actually get to them if you were in a wheelchair. There were no dropped curbs to get up, and if you could, there wasn't any room around the charger to access it anyway. We found that some of the charging units were too high to reach. We found that some of the screens were too high to see or operate if you were in a wheelchair. Aside from that, the parking bays were just regular-sized bays. There was no cross-hatching, so if you were in a wheelchair, there was no room to actually get between the cars or get your car out of the chair if you keep it in the passenger seat. So there were issues. Now, it's not all doom and gloom. There are advancements being made in that area. Motability have worked hard with OZEV and BSI to work on a new charging accessibility standard. And what that does is helps to alleviate some of those problems I've mentioned. So if you see some of the newer charging hubs, like that Osprey one on screen, you'll notice there's larger charging bays, there's cross-hatching, there's no curbs in the way so you can actually get to the chargers, there's no obstructions. The cables, because the cables themselves are actually quite heavy if you've not used a public charger yet, they're weight managed, so it takes some of the strain away from lifting the actual unit and plugging that into the car. So there's been lots of thought and innovation around that area, and thankfully that is continuing and the situation is improving.
So the other thing we're talking about charging is the cost of using public chargers. So we talked about electricity prices rising. The downside is that, effectively, if you use a motorway services or most rapid chargers, it will actually cost you more than filling up an equivalent petrol car, which is obviously rather a worry. That said, the other side, the other flip to that coin is that if you charge at home on a cheap overnight tariff, actually suddenly it becomes much cheaper to charge your electric car. And we did a road trip from London to Leeds to get these figures, but actually that was based on a 10p rate, so the minimum rate. Actually, you can get far cheaper rates than that when you charge up overnight. So suddenly an electric car can make sense, but it's thinking about how you're going to use it. If you're going to be relying solely on the public charging network, it's much harder to make a case. If you're going to be charging at home, suddenly all these problems around charging in the public and the costs and things like that, they disappear. So let's bear in mind, how are you going to use your car? Bear in mind too that the average mileage of the UK motorists is 127 miles a week. Now we do our own real-world tests of electric cars. Most electric cars on sale today will do between 200 and 300 miles on charge in the real world. So again, something to think about when you're doing it. Other thing is cost. Now, there's big talks about electric cars are much more expensive than petrol cars. However, because of this drop-off in demand that we've seen manufacturers struggling to sell these cars. And that means you can get discounts have gone up 200% in the last year on electric cars, and they've gone from the least discounted cars to the most discounted cars.
And if you get your car through the Motability scheme, you might be wondering, well, okay, how is that relevant to me? Well, the good news is car manufacturers do need to shift these electric cars. They have targets to meet. So the upshot of that is that currently there's some fantastic deals on electric cars on the Motability scheme. If you look at the advance payments, they're actually incredibly low. So what you get is a car that's actually worth quite a lot of money with quite a lot of specifications, things like electric boot opening, heated seats, that kind of thing, for not a lot of advance payment. So if you're in a situation where you could consider an electric car, now is actually a very good time to have a look, test drive one, and see if it would suit your needs.
Final point on electric cars from me is to say that, so we do our own surveys to around people who have bought electric cars, people who haven't bought electric cars, what are they thinking of buying next? So ICE drivers, that's petrol, diesel cars, etc., just 11% of them are currently thinking about buying an electric car next, according to our research. However, electric car buyers, 91% of them, that's electric car current owners, are thinking of buying or planning to buy another electric car again, which shows, again, if it fits into your lifestyle, if it works for you, it actually can make a lot of sense.
The other challenge around the move to electric vehicles are wheelchair-accessible vehicles. Now, I won't go into this too much because there's actually a couple of talks later on this, and I'd recommend attending those. But one of the main issues is in order to create a WAV, a lot of the time they cut a section out of the floor in order to have the ramp at the back of the car. Electric cars house their batteries in the floor of the car, and you can't simply cut a big chunk out of a battery. So there are some quite big challenges in that space. But again, much like with the public charging, there's lots of innovation at the moment, and people are looking into these problems. So you'll actually be able to hear a talk from these guys later, but up on screen is the Callum Evita, which is a concept vehicle, but it's a collaboration between Callum Design. Callum is a huge name in the automotive industry, if you're not familiar with it, carries a lot of weight, and Motability Operations. And what this serves as is a very good call to action to the car industry to say, this is what's possible if we include inclusive, accessible design principles from the start. So I won't go into too much detail about why that's so interesting, but because there will be people talking about it later. But it's good that actually the industry is starting to think about these issues and is taking them on.
Okay, we're going to move on now to connectivity of cars. And as it says there, we take a lot of this stuff for granted now. So we have sat-nav in our cars, we have emergency SOS call systems, so if you're involved in an accident, all you don't have to do is press a button rather than call for help. We've got over-the-air software updates, which basically means you can get updates to your car without visiting the dealer, which is obviously very good convenience. And then we have things like Apple Android Auto, Apple CarPlay, that allow us basically to have the functionality of our phone operated through our cars. What's changing, or the trends that we're seeing, is manufacturers seem to be going two directions with this. So on the one hand, you've got brands like Citroën, for example, who are saying, well, because everyone's using their phone to power their infotainment system, why am I going to the trouble of putting this into a car and the cost of engineering this? So what I'll do is instead I'll put a screen in the car, I'll put a socket in there, and you plug your phone into the car, and that is effectively your infotainment system. The car doesn't have one apart from that. And then on the other hand, you've got premium brands, some Volvo are involved in this, and they're going, well, no, we can't, our customers expect that. We can't just have a screen in the car. But what we'll do is, instead of engineering the system ourselves, we will get someone else to do it for us. That way, hopefully, it will be more compatible with phones. So, for example, they're teamed up with Google. You've got some people doing with Apple, things like that to actually get, so it's not so much the manufacturers engineering the systems anymore. Well, the other projecting thing is, so this is not something we have yet, but it's something that's coming soon. I'm sure we've all read a lot about AI in the media, what it's going to do for us. Well, one thing it should help with is our cars. So BMW, Mercedes, Peugeot, Volkswagen, Volvo have all come out and said, we are going to input AI into our cars in the near future. And the thing that could potentially probably have the best help with is voice control systems. So a lot of cars rely on touchscreens these days. The trouble with touchscreens is they're quite distracting to use on the move, but we're not going away from them, let's be honest, because they're cheaper for the manufacturers to engineer, so they're not going to be putting physical controls back in the car, sadly. But a voice control system that works effectively could solve a lot of our problems. Trouble is, at the moment, there are some good voice control systems at the moment. There are some that they're put down as they understand natural speech, but all it really means is that they have a wider range of commands that they understand. But AI could actually help them genuinely understand natural speech. I mean, I know, so in my car, I've got a BMW, and the voice control system in that is really good for some things, but then if I ask it to call my wife, it tries to navigate me to Huntingford in Cambridgeshire. So things like that where it has its limits. And here's another example. So this is the brand new Volkswagen ID7, not got a AI system yet. As I said, they're not on sale, but here's an example of sort of issues you might have with a voice control system at the moment, which hopefully AI will solve.
Hey ID, please can you adjust the fan speed to a faster setting?
Switching the front left fan to the lowest setting.
So it's gone down.
That is useful.
I don't know how to do that yet.
If you own this car, you would just turn it off.
You would turn it off,
wouldn't
but the thing is that Volkswagen have said, well,
According
look,
to Rushian Mitchin and Everbriggs.com.
What was that?
Sorry.
shut
I
up.
don't do that yet.
Turn
Cancel.
off, turn off, cancel.
Genuinely dreadful.
So
So as you can see, voice control isn't quite there yet. There are some good applications, but it's not perfect. AI should hopefully change that. We've already seen how good machine learning is in terms of how it understands human language. What that means is you no longer need to remember specific commands. You would just be able to say to your car, oh, can you make it a bit warmer, or I'm too hot, or something like that. And the car would be able to interpret that and know what you want to do. So, you know, the possibilities of that are particularly interesting when you think of auxiliary controls, as Steve mentioned. Manufacturers are putting more and more controls into touchscreens, which are difficult for anyone to use and are quite distracting, frankly. But particularly if you have limb differences, and sometimes operating those controls is just impossible unless you have particular adaptations. But if you think that, you know, being able to operate those controls would be as simple as saying, indicate left, indicate right, things like that, then suddenly the possibilities are particularly interesting.
Right. Also, so some manufacturers now are starting to put systems where their cars speak to each other. So this is not AI really, but it's effectively the cars communicate with each other. The idea is that it's a bit like what your sat-nav does in terms of tells you whether there's traffic ahead. But it could also, for example, alert you to the direction that an ambulance is coming from, for example, so you don't have to struggle to see where that's coming from, things like that. The downside with it at the moment is that it only works within a manufacturer. Manufacturers are not sharing from each other. So effectively, if you've got a Volkswagen, you're relying on another Volkswagen having seen the ambulance rather than any other car out there. But potentially, going forward, if all cars could speak to each other, this is something that could really make a difference to driving. And all cars speaking to each other also, frankly, leads into our next point, which is driver distance technology. So if you look at driver distance technology, this is a list of some of the driver aids that you'd expect to find on a car these days. This is the vast majority of cars actually have these systems.
Yeah, and what's particularly interesting there is at the moment, we're seeing quite long lead times in terms of car repairs. So anyone who has a bump in a car park, something silly like that, the car can be off the road for quite a long time. And obviously, if your car has specific adaptations, or your car is particularly suited to your needs, sometimes you can't get a courtesy car, or the courtesy car you get just simply doesn't work for you. And that's a real problem if you need your car to get around. So any technologies like this that can keep you on the road are incredibly useful. Aside from that, we're seeing, so as Steve mentioned before, the cars talking to each other in theory. Once they get that working and allow different manufacturers to talk to different manufacturers, then you've got the possibility of massively reducing potential accidents, etc. But also some of these technologies that are available now will help prevent you from having silly accidents on the road. So lots of them are active that will apply the brakes to the car for you if you're about to reverse into someone and that kind of thing. So it's worth having a look at the latest technologies that are available now, because they will make a big difference. But we're heading in a more interesting direction than that.
And the end goal here, obviously, is autonomous driving technology. But to give you an idea of where we are in terms of how far away we are from that, so level 5 is, there's 6 levels, because 0 is no assistance at all, but 6 levels of driving technology, level 5 being the top one in terms of, well, that will be fully autonomous car. The car can drive itself. You basically can put your feet up, read a book, go to sleep, whatever you want. However, at the moment, to show you how far away we are, that we're at level 2. So, but it's probably not all. So actually, apologies.
Yeah, no, level 5 is where it gets particularly interesting, because level 5 is where the driver no longer needs to assume any responsibility. The car drives itself. Now, why that's interesting is because the inside of cars look like the way they do, because we have to drive them. So you have a steering wheel, you have a center console, you have a screen, etc. So the car has to look like that. Once you no longer have to assume control of the car, the inside can change. The car can look drastically different. And suddenly that opens huge doors in terms of accessibility, because you can move around where the doors are, you can have huge open spaces in order to get a wheelchair in. And perhaps most importantly, people who would need someone else with them normally to drive for them could suddenly go out on their own. So the implications of new freedom, etc., for certain people is really quite exciting. But we're a little bit away from that.
We are indeed. And one of the things we have to overcome is how the car handles a situation when there is no way to avoid an accident. It's an old school problem, the trolley problem. How do you sacrifice one person to save many? Do you sacrifice the occupants of the car or the people on the road? These are horrible questions, but they are questions that will have to be answered before self-driving cars can come on the road. And as we talked about, car manufacturers need to talk to each other in terms of other systems. They will need to talk to each other because the cars will need to behave in a way where they work together rather than working for their own self-interest and potentially causing an accident because they're both trying to do something that conflicts. But perhaps the biggest issue of all here is us, whether or not we trust these systems. Now, with the current systems you drive them, some of them are actually really, really good, others not so much. So do you trust these systems? And an idea of probably the lack of trust there is and what we've got to overcome came a few years ago. So we ended up recommending something called the Dacia Sandero. Very cheap little car, practical, comfortable, I say great value, less than £10,000, obviously in an era of rising costs, that's fantastic. And we spoke to Euro NCAP, the safety experts, about it, and we said, what's the deal here in terms of a safety perspective? Because that was the concern. And they went, no, we have no concerns looking at it on paper. When they actually crash tested the car, they gave it 2 stars. And that was like, we were like, whoa, okay, we've been recommending a car here that's got a 2-star safety rating. That is really worrying. How are people going to react to that? The general reaction was, I don't care. It only failed because it's got all these it doesn't have all the driver assistance technologies. I don't like those anyway. And so that surely shows, I think, to say, it's probably, well, yes, we're some way away on the technology. Probably the biggest factor of all is the acceptance of us and the trust of us in these technologies. That's it from us, but do we have any questions?
Yeah, we've got a couple of minutes left if anyone has any questions. I think we might be...
Okay, then.
I think that's us done.
Fantastic. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for listening,
with
guys.
us with the technical issues, and have a good day.
Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.